Hi everyone. Hi Shahroo. Thank you for spending your time with us tonight. Tonight, we're here to discuss the kindness method, which is the self-help book of the month. Each month I choose a book that had changed my life and work through it with our members. And this one I just really loved because I love the whole concept of the way to change a habit is not to just concentrate on the bad things about the habit and what you think maybe you're about yourself, but it's actually looking at the good stuff and kind of how you want your life to look as a whole and kind of work backwards from there. So thank you, Sheree, for this book because I love it. And thanks for your time tonight. So we're going to spend about half an hour chatting, and then we've also got a few questions that people sent in to us. So let's get started, shall we?
Brilliant.
I would love to just ask you, first of all, about your story, because you call yourself a behavioural change specialist and you have worked in addiction, but you've also used the kindness method on yourself. So can you tell us a bit about that?
I have, yeah. I worked in addiction treatment, in frontline addiction treatment, and I saw that a lot of the motivational tools that were being used, like the basic mapping stuff and the evidence base that it was drawing from, it wasn't specific to addiction. It could apply to anything where you're just making a change and changing the status quo, because the exercises were centered around increasing your self-esteem, looking at resilience, preempting your triggers, and increasing your self-awareness, essentially. And at the time, I've always been either really, really overweight or starving and slim, just waiting to be overweight again. And it wasn't until I started realizing what approaches were working with people in addiction that I started applying them to myself.
You said you kind of put weight on, took it off, put it on, took it off, maybe. What strategies were you using before? Just kind of...
everything, but mainly just punitive, mean starvation, basically. Yeah. And it would start with things like, how did you get to this?
Okay.
How have you let it come to this? And so in the short term, I sort of white knuckle things, and that always works, but unfortunately feeling crap about yourself doesn't really get you, doesn't help you in the long term, doesn't help you maintain the levels of resilience you need to get through those periods of time when you're really tested.
Yeah, and you talk about the conversations that you have with yourself a lot in this book and changing those conversations. So it sounds like a lot of the words I think in the book you used to describe how you saw your body and yourself before were really quite toxic words and so quite toxic conversations. And then you shifted that, and that made a big change for you.
Oh, definitely. And I think also you forgive yourself because you realize that those voices don't come from nowhere. And that your behaviors don't come from nowhere. In fact, your behaviors, even if they're unwanted now and a problem now, at one point were a solution. And so taking that approach makes you a lot more forgiving of yourself, I think. It makes you start thinking, oh, well, of course, I'm only human. And it was giving me comfort, or it was the only way that I knew, or people always told me that I was that kind of person, and I never stopped to question it.
Yeah. So you talk about, habits serving us. So there's a reason. There's always a reason for a habit, isn't there?
Yeah. And I think that was one of the major things that I learned working in addiction, is that everyone knows what's bad about habits that aren't serving you. Everyone knows. But what's good about them is not only what distinguishes people and helps them create a bespoke plan and makes it personal to address them, but it also shines light on what purpose they're serving and what else could be serving that purpose.
Okay, so maybe, sorry to interrupt, I was just saying, so you're kind of looking at healthier ways, or maybe ways that serve you now that after the habit stops serving you, but it's a habit. So it's things it's a habit. And I think also looking at things where, obviously when it comes to habits around things like food and alcohol and other drugs, these are things that tend to get less effective. And so although they can be comforting and they're really good at what they do in the short term, if we only default onto that one habit and don't diversify it a bit, not only does it become less effective, but we're also depriving ourselves of creating a more targeted and bespoke and appropriate response or coping strategy to things like stress and day-to-day generalized anxiety, etc. And I think you talk a lot about it's long-term and sustained change, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
What we're aiming for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's certainly something that I've learned. I'm a real quick fix kind of person, And I always was. But I looked at it over the span of, say, a year or 3 years or 5 years, and I realized that I'd been on God knows how many diets, and overall, on balance, I'd gained weight every year.
Yeah, and it sounds like, and you weren't happy, whether you were small or big or anywhere in between, because you're always chasing something that even, I think there's some part of the book where you talk about, I don't know, you dieted to get into a certain dress or for a certain party. And then when you achieved it, you spent one day kind of kept thinking, feeling like queen of the world. And then then the voices start again. So you're kind of, you don't enjoy getting to you don't enjoy being at the destination even.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, it's so flattering and surreal having someone tell me about something that I've written. It's brilliant. But you're absolutely right. Do you know what? Everyone does that though. Like if you think about when you got a degree or a new job or something, and how much you've celebrated it hasn't been taken away from you. You just stop celebrating. You just start looking at the other stuff you don't like about it, or what's the next thing, or it's not as good as I thought, or maybe I'm a fraud. Like we're so quick to default back onto not celebrating again. And for me, that was the problem. I isolated weight loss as just this thing that was going to fix everything, as opposed to looking at how it was going to help me live a better life overall.
Yeah.
And how that achievement in itself could feed my self-esteem.
Mm-hmm. And so a large part of the book is maps and kind of guides that you write for yourself about exactly that, about things that you have done well or things that you like about yourself.
And you start noticing it when you're doing some sort of program.
Yeah. Should we talk about, I love the snapshot letter. So that's the kind of, so there's quite a lot of exercises in the book, which quite a lot, I mean, a lot of self-help people love an exercise. But I think it's important to do all of these, and it's really important to do them in the order that you've written them down, especially the snapshot letter is important to do first. Do you want to explain what the snapshot letter is?
Yeah, sure. The snapshot letter is a letter that you write to yourself to not forget where you got to. So for some people, this like rock bottom mentality. I'm not a huge believer in rock bottom, because I think most of the people I've spoken to have had many rock bottoms, and each time it's got worse and worse, and they've normalized it again and again. And I did it with my weight, certainly. I'd be like, oh God, I'm 15 stone. Oh God, I'm 17 stone. I never thought I'd let it get to this. Something has to stop. And yet it would keep increasing. And so it almost made me feel worse. But there is something to be said for capturing that moment where it seems really important.
It's that feeling, isn't it, of never again, I don't, the kind of mortification the morning after, or like you say, stepping on the scales and seeing something you said you'd never see or you never wanted to see. And the idea of normalizing something. So I think you give an example in the book of someone that comes in 1 week and they hate their job and they want to change their life. They want to make all these big changes. A few weeks later, when it's starting to get a bit tricky and they're not maybe seeing so many results so quickly, then it's kind of like, it's not that bad. The job's not that bad. I quite like my boss, tough love, that kind of stuff. And what you're saying is, have a look at the letter you wrote yourself, reminding yourself of why you wanted to make all these changes when you did feel at your kind of, maybe not your worst, but your most despairing.
Yeah. In addiction, we call that euphoric recall. So it's about when, certainly I see it a lot with my clients, where they'll come in and the first thing they do is report all the negatives of their behavior. Usually it's because something's happened. There's been a recent incident that has shifted something and made them think that's it. Right. And we make the mistake of thinking we're going to stay in that state, but we normalize it quickly. And then also because we want to stay in our place of comfort ultimately. And when things start getting a bit difficult, I certainly find myself and my clients are very good at thinking back in a very rose-tinted way and omitting a lot of the elements of their behavior that had become really hurtful to them. And there are other ways of minimizing our problems. For example, one of my triggers used to be watching really, really serious documentaries.
Right. Well, that would be a trigger for eating.
Pardon me?
What would that be the trigger for?
For just going off my diet and thinking, well, these are such first world problems I have.
Right. Yeah.
What am I doing depriving myself of food when there's famine?
Yeah.
And then I would
just be happy and just do something that makes you feel good.
Yeah, which is totally valid, by the way. It's totally valid. It just happens not to be true of me.
Yeah. And just as we were saying before it's talking about the bigger picture and self-esteem generally it's kind of liking yourself enough to not make that quick decision that what's going to make you feel good now it's not necessarily the thing that will make you feel good in the future.
No, it's about looking at two things. One is sort of cost benefit and zooming out. You know, if I make a decision about food this evening, I know that that decision may dictate a decision I make about my job on Thursday.
Right, yeah.
And that's my own personal understanding of the way that my habits and the conversations I have with myself lead on from each other. And so I think everyone kind of needs to do that for themselves, because sometimes it's not rational.
No. And does that understanding come from doing things like the exercise in the book, or do you think it's age as well, or is it experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all experts by experience. When I see clients about food, I never tell them, we never talk about what to eat. I just ask them, I just create a framework in which I can guide them to draw on their own experience. And, there's a bit in the book about, not finding yourself, but meeting yourself. And so many of us expect to get to this elusive place where we're waking up at dawn and manage, this Monday's different because of this, this, and this. And frankly, if you've spent the last 10 or 15 years kind of doing the same thing and being inclined to do the same stuff, then before you try to make profound changes, just acknowledge that that's how you do stuff. For example, I used to think that if I was going to be productive and successful, I have to get up at the crack of dawn.
Yeah.
I don't. I am productive and successful, and I get up at like 9ish.
So working out kind of what works for you.
Yeah, and then work around that. And then once you've got results under your belt, once you're being fueled by your life looking and feeling better, then your resilience levels are higher and you can start challenging yourself. I can get up earlier, etc. But at the beginning, I think it's just about making yourself feel as good as possible about this. And like, it's not a punishment.
No. So, and it's kind of, so gentle, so being gentle with yourself and ultimately, obviously, being kind to yourself.
Yeah. And reminding yourself that you're fine. This is just a way to make yourself feel better, better than you already are.
So we don't need to be fixed necessarily. It's just
we don't need a fix.
Yeah. What I mean, like what you're just talking about, maybe if it's maybe food is the issue. You talked to me about how people who work in addiction don't look at the substance, or if it's about habit, it's not always about the subject or the object. It's actually about how you feel about yourself. So it's not, like you said, I'm not going to talk to you about what not to eat or what not to do or or how to behave.
Yeah. In the case of physical dependence, obviously that's a different thing. Mm-hmm. We're talking about drugs that you're going to withdraw from. They're going to be dangerous, clinical interventions needed, we need to be risk averse and safe. But when it comes to day-to-day habits, for the most part, it doesn't really matter what behavior you're talking about, because as far as I'm concerned and from my experience, you need some self-awareness, some self-esteem, some self-belief, and a framework to work from, be that a plan or whatever. And I learned that from looking at the 12 steps, And I read, Russell Brand says that everyone's working a program. I agree. So you can either choose a program of your own, like I have with the kindness method, or you can carry on with the program that you're working based on how life has happened to shape you. Yeah.
And you think a framework, whatever that might be, it could work from something like biting your nails through to a drug addiction. It's about managing all the stuff around it, as you just kind of mentioned.
Yeah, it's about understanding motivation as a concept, as opposed to beating yourself up. It's more academic exercise. It's just saying, all right, this is how humans get stuff done and stay on track. So I guess, and if I'm not doing that, then that's why I'm not getting stuff done and staying on track. I often say, both in the book and with my clients, the first habit that you use the kindness method for is just the one that you're happening to practice on first.
Yeah.
But the idea is that you can then learn this concept and apply it to everything across different stages of your life. Because I feel very passionately about the fact that people shouldn't then become dependent on me.
Right. Yeah.
Go from being dependent on something else to dependent on me. Really, it is just a handover of tools to say, you can just use these concepts over and over and over and over again, rather than keep handing yourself over to an expert who you have to spend ages with, who you have to tell your whole history to, and create a rapport with, when a lot of this we can do for ourselves, I think.
Yeah. And do you want to talk maybe a little bit about the framework that you do give in the book? Because I think that you're right, that the idea behind it is that these are mind maps you create, or notes that you write to yourself that you can keep forever and refer back to forever. Ultimately, I think that's your objective, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The exercises that I've done are based on everything that I've found useful for me and my clients. And they've had to have been useful for me and my clients and my workshop attendees to make it into the book.
Mm-hmm. So
And a lot
of it tested.
Oh yeah, definitely. And a lot of it's been tested on really obscure habits and things that people don't think will be applicable. And so I've tweaked it to make it more generic or more, I think the framework really is about doing a chunk of work to see where you're at and where you've got to. So you sit down and really give that some commitment. And that is just writing mind maps that I guide you through. And the only reason that a lot of them are mind maps is because I just think they're easier to look at and glance at and see a lot of things. And I think it's very impactful, for example, if you're looking at a map of your strengths or achievements, not only to see the content of that map, but to see the quantity, the impact of it, as opposed to if it's written in paragraphs or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and then what you do is you actually go and you practically plan your changes. And you feel accountable because they're written down. I mean, it's really simple. I think a lot of people just, myself included, just kind of wanted to be told not what to do, but how to do it.
Yeah. I think, being accountable, even being accountable to yourself, isn't it? Making some kind of plan means that some part of you has decided this is a good idea. So then when you're about to go off course because, I don't know, peer pressure or after a few drinks or whatever it might be, if you're able to then refer back to this kind of better version of yourself, maybe, or not better version, but wiser at the time.
Well, the one who has your best long-term interests at heart, and knows and has preempted that you're going to be tested and will require cues. And do you know what? It isn't just peer pressure. It's and things like that. It's the fact that in that moment where you want nothing more than to default back onto that habit that helps you avoid or distract or comfort or ease.
Yeah.
It's going to be impossible to bring to the forefront of your mind all the reasons why it's important for you to change.
Mm-hmm.
And very often I will look at the maps that I made 2 or 3 years ago. Well, no, actually more than that now, 3 or 4 years ago. I can't believe the tiny ways I suffered. Every single day, all day. Tiny things. And I'll read them and I'll go, on the bus, feel like another big person can't sit next to me because then 2 of us can't sit on the bus, like all the tiny considerations and worries and things that I would just never remember if I was just looking at a cake when I was hungry. I wouldn't think about the bus, And so being able to glance at my phone, pardon?
They're the things that cut deep though, aren't they, at the time?
They're the things that really impact your quality of life. And you know what? If I didn't have those as reminders, maybe I wouldn't protect my weight loss as I do.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't give myself as much credit because I'd forget.
I was just going to show you, this is my
wow, which one's that?
That's my ways I'm happy to be mind map. And there's loads of stuff on there. But some of the stuff is really like just no drama is one thing I've written. And but everything I was writing, well, not everything, but quite a few things, then I wanted to kind of caveat it and say, yeah, okay, I'm quite calm, but I wish I was more exciting. But it's like, that's not the idea, is it? The idea is just a bunch of words and sentiments that make you feel good. Yeah. So I love this.
A big part of it too is, the self-awareness bit. The self-esteem bit's done by writing it down and seeing it visually, the practical element. The self-awareness bit comes about when you start listening into those caveats and going, why the hell can't I just give myself a compliment and leave it at that?
Yeah. So it's that awareness, isn't it? So you're kind of like, you're catching yourself and you're listening to that conversation. And I think that's the first stage before you can then change the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And you obviously work, so you have a private practice and you've worked in the NHS, and you have all different kinds of clients with all different kinds of weird and wonderful habits. Do you have a particular success story that comes to mind?
I'm delighted to say I have many, but I think no, I am. It's so rewarding and wonderful. And you know what? The success stories, I can tell you ones about people who were, injecting heroin into their groins and got their children back. Yeah. Or I can tell you ones about people who've been looking at social media every 20 minutes for the last 7 years and feel like they've got their lives back. I'd say the thing that I enjoy most, or I take most pride in, is working at a recovery house for young women set up by the Amy Winehouse Foundation. Because seeing people who are younger with far fewer internal and external resources, usually, who are so wise
Yeah.
and self-aware and switched on and have adopted all these tools as a result of their involvement in the recovery community, as opposed to paying for a fancy workshop, only serves to kind of remind me that this stuff will work on anyone.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I see them on Mondays too, so it's a really nice way to start the week, I have to say. That's my favorite. Yeah, that's my favorite bit of my job, I'd say.
do they know that you're a published author now? What do they think about that?
I dedicated the book to them.
Amazing.
Yeah, so they're really excited for me, but it was a really interesting process of them finding out. It's kind of like when you realize that your teacher's got a real life, or you see them in the supermarket and you're like, oh, you buy sandwiches, how weird that my teacher would eat sandwich, like it's like this whole other world. And so it all emerged, and they, words spread pretty quickly, but it doesn't stop them making fun of me. They don't think I'm cool.
Not
at
yet.
all. Yeah, they don't think I'm cool at all.
What's the main takeaway you want people to take from this book?
Everyone thinks they're the worst at the habit that they're trying to change. Everyone thinks that they're not maybe not even consciously, but everyone I've spoken to finds it difficult to speak to themselves kindly without the caveats and the conditions.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you that as someone who's spoken to hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of people now with these exercises. It can't be true of us all. Yeah. We have to stop being horrible to ourselves if we're all doing it. And we're all saying, oh, but I'd speak to so and so that way, or I'd forgive that person really, really quickly. And the beauty of it is, when we're talking about habits, speaking kindly to yourself is a nice thing to do. And when it comes to living well and self-esteem, etc., it's a good idea anyway. We know that. Anyone who's read a decent self-help book knows that. It also gets you where you want to be a lot more quickly.
Yeah. And
that's the bit that I think people click onto too, the sort of quick fix, practical people in us. Because I'm definitely one of those people. Yeah. If I, that's why I'm trying to redefine kindness as something that gets you to where you want to be more quickly, as opposed to gently does it. I'm not a gently does it kind of person. I'm very much a let's get this done. And if I forgive myself quickly because I ate a sandwich or I beat myself up, the difference is I'm back on track and I stay looking how I want and feeling how I want, or I've delayed the process of getting back on track and increased my withdrawal period as a result. Yeah.
Well, I think it's about the book, seems to me very much about using kindness to get results, which is a brilliant combination of being gentle with yourself, but also understanding that it's going to help. What you spoke about, actually, I think one of the questions that we've been sent in touches on that. So should we go to the questions? I think we've got 4 or 5. So I'm going to read them out.
Brain time.
And we're going to keep them anonymous because people have sent them in like DM does or Facebook does, and but you'll know who you are once I'm asking them. So 2 questions from Facebook. The first one, do you think there's a difference in changing physical habits versus emotional ones? For example, binging on junk food versus anxiety about driving. Could you use the same strategies and techniques on both?
I mean, invariably, there are 2 things here. One is, again, the physical withdrawal element. So if you're talking about drugs or alcohol, etc., and sugar, you need to build into your resilience exercises and your expectation of how hard it will be, the fact that you will be in physical discomfort. So that's one thing to bear in mind. But the other thing is, with the more internal work, I think it's particularly important to be logging what you're doing and what you're achieving and using visual cues, etc., because it might not be as evident to you or others that you're improving.
So monitoring it is
monitoring it and just looking at things that, very often we don't mind writing on a CV, I didn't used to be able to do this, but now I can do this. When it comes to our emotional skills, I think that's really important. Like, I find it if I'm speaking to people who I used to find really triggering and I've made a concerted effort to respond to them differently. Yeah. I have a framework in place that means I make a note of that and I remember it, or else it just becomes my new normal again. Yeah. And so I'd say if it's not visible stuff, make it visible.
Make it visible. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
I love this one. This is also from Facebook. This is somebody who's read the book and says, I've done all the maps, but one reason I don't change is that I sometimes forget I'm trying until it's too late. Any tips on reminding ourselves that we're really trying to change a habit? For example, before the third latte.
Yes. I had the same problem with nail biting when I was younger.
Yeah.
I didn't realize I wasn't biting my nails today until I'd bitten them all off.
Is that just because it's a subconscious, it's such a habit that it's things like this are subconscious and
it's just autopilot behaviors. You know, I've been reading a lot about tech recently and how we can, and how these devices are made addictive on purpose. And the idea is that tech is trying to reduce friction as much as possible because it appeals to autopilot behaviors. And so I think that my job, and the job of all of us to some extent, is to impose friction, to make ourselves have to think about the steps we're going through, as opposed to just our arms doing some things.
To make it harder then to get the...
Make it harder, yeah. Like, for example, if you want to delete a social media app, don't just delete the app with the shaky exy thing. Yeah. Log out. You know, log out of the app and make sure it's really difficult. Like, reset your password and all these points at which you start thinking, why did I delete it in the first place? Yeah. I remember, because it was causing havoc in my life. And, you know, before you know it, and unfortunately, especially when it comes to tech, we're really having to swim against a pretty heavy current there. Now all you have to do is pretty much breathe near your phone and like a toaster arrives.
Yeah.
You know, but I'd say, sorry, I've gone off the subject. One thing I find really, really useful to remind me that I'm doing a plan is in the morning when the kettle's boiling.
Yeah.
I spend, how long does a kettle take to boil? A minute and a half. I quickly jot down the things that are going to the things I think are going to test me that day.
So a bit of forward planning.
Just tiny bit, just to kind of remind yourself that you're trying to do something. Even the fact that you've put pen to paper will be enough, and a minute in the morning is all you need. This is not some huge journaling exercise. Just wake up in the morning and go, my intention is to have this many coffees today or whatever. Yeah. Write it down, and and then it exists. And I'd also recommend writing it down in your own handwriting. Like, don't, you know, all of these exercises, a lot of them I write on my phone, etc. But if you can do that practice of getting them down on paper in your own handwriting, there is something quite impactful about that, I think.
And it kind of lodges there, doesn't it? I think I said subconscious before when I meant unconscious. Because another thing is about kind of getting up in the morning. Quite a few people have spoken to me about, like you said, they want to get up early, they've got things to do, but they just hit snooze. They'll just hit snooze. They just keep hitting snooze, and because they're not awake enough to remember why they're getting up early, or it's not enough of a draw. So I've started putting the reminders. I think you might have seen I kind of edit the reminders in my phone saying, wake up, this is a miracle morning, wake up, you're doing this today. So yeah, physical reminders and snapshots like that, I suppose.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, just know yourself, you know, create the level of control that you need based on your own experience, not based on what you think should be the case for people or what you aspire to be. Mm-hmm. Because the problem then also becomes that you don't have a fair benchmark from which to really acknowledge how well you've done, if it wasn't from an honest place. And I think that's another thing that I really like about the kindness method, if I'm honest, is that people can do it privately. I've had so many clients tell me when the GP asks them how much they drink or smoke, they lie.
Of course, yeah.
You know? And so the next time, unless they say it's less than their lie, they haven't improved. And so then it just throws it all into disarray.
I really like the idea of comparing yourself with yourself, maybe like 6 months ago, a year ago, rather than comparing yourself to everybody else. Like you say, everyone's got their different benchmark, and that's the only way you know if you're improving, isn't it?
Totally. And also, even when you're comparing yourself to someone else, I mean, there are new and awful ways for us to do that, which create all sorts of new expectations that aren't even based on their reality.
No.
You know, like looking at Instagram or whatever, and then comparing yourself to something they've created, which isn't real either. I mean, it's all messed up. Just deal with your own stuff. You know? It's all too much.
Right, 2 more questions.
Yeah.
This is somebody who's Instagram does actually, but the question is, I spend too much time overthinking situations. I would love to be more productive and less worried. So how can I do that?
This is something that I have some advice for this, and this is actually something that I didn't learn from addiction treatment. It's something I learned from my own experience. So I used to suffer really badly with anxiety.
Yeah.
And ruminating over things that I couldn't change, I couldn't control, that were unknown, things that people had said about me, worrying about whether people were talking about me, just worrying about things I had no control over. And I knew when I would think back on it, like a week later, I'd always think back and I'd go, oh, I remember I was on the Hammersmith and City line and I was really, really anxious and worried and thinking, and I could never remember what it was about.
Right. But you can remember the feeling.
I remember the feeling, and it was such a waste of time, but I only knew that on reflection. And it felt like I kept learning that lesson over and over and over again. It's kind of like when you've been getting your period for 20 years and every month you still go,
Surprise.
Pardon?
Surprise.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, why do I keep doing this? And so what I did is, on the notes section of my phone, whenever I felt anxious about something or I was over worrying about something, I'd write down what I thought was going on really, really quickly. So I'd just write, I think this is going on, and that's what is worrying me. And that's all I would do.
Yeah.
And I'd just leave it. And then later on, an hour later or 2 hours later or the day after, I would look in it and I would write down what actually happened, what actually transpired to be the case. 9 out of 10 times, even if I had something to worry about, I hadn't guessed the right thing to worry about anyway. So either way, it was a waste of time. And I was ill prepared. I think we think that being organized and thinking forward is a strength. And it really is. I'm a real forward thinker, but the continued rumination and repeating of the same thoughts and worries is not preparing you. I think on the contrary, it's actually lowering your resilience because of the amount of energy it takes out of you. And
especially if it's things you can't control, which is or that are out of your control.
And also I think if this person who's written in is anything like me, we're very good at remembering the things that when we were right.
Yeah.
When we thought something bad was going to happen and it did, we remember that.
Yeah, of course.
Whereas maybe you're thinking 300 things bad things are going to happen in a day and only 299 of them did.
Yeah.
Sorry, the other way. Only one of them did and 299 didn't. And so what I decided was that I needed some data. So rather than thinking I could fix it straight away, I just started a collection. This is what's happened. This is what I think has happened. So say, for example, my friend's ignoring me. I think it's because I said this about her dog.
Yeah.
And then a day later, I'll get a message from that friend saying, oh, my phone was in my uncle's house. Do you know what I mean? And you're like, oh my God, what a waste of time.
Yeah.
And realizing how much you're projecting onto situations. And so now I have a bank of literally about 1,000 instances. And so often I'll go back to it and I'll think, well, that's identical to the situation where before I thought this was going to happen. And I just it's all become a bit textbook. I'm not this complicated case anymore. I just go, oh, of course you think that. And then I just cut to the end and it doesn't bother me as much anymore. It takes a while to create that collection, but I think it's a lifelong investment that's worth working towards.
And it's just highlighting, like you say, the ridiculousness of it maybe, or the waste of time and energy.
Yeah, it's absurd a lot of the time. I think making a distinction between what we can and can't change is really important. And again, that's what I learned that from AA recovery, from the Serenity Prayer. And
I think this is what's so amazing about the book. It's such a combination of what you've learned through your practice and through your work, and also what you use, which is why I think is just so brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah, and do you know what? I'm the laziest. So I have to make things really convenient for me, really easy to use, or else I won't use them. I used to go to sleep in my gym clothes.
Just so that when you woke up, there was no excuse.
Yeah. Even then, I'd make excuses sometimes, but I would look down and be like, right, what else have you got? What other excuse could you possibly have? You're ready to go. The sun's shining. The door's practically open.
Yeah.
And so I had to accommodate things to make them really easy for me. I was never one of those people who could just, if I put my mind to it, I'll do it. No, not at all. I was like, quick fix, cut corners, blag away, let's get this
Make it
done.
easy. Keep it
Yeah,
simple.
exactly.
We're going to finish on this question, which is actually, I think, a really, really good point. How can I deal with real setbacks that have resulted in me stopping the program temporarily? So this is somebody that has read the book and has been using the framework, but obviously has had some setbacks. Would you restart completely, or would you reread your letters and maps? And I suppose that's maybe that you could talk about a lapse versus a relapse there as well, because you talk about that a little bit in the book.
Yeah, I think the strengths maps, ways I'm happy to be, and things I'm proud of should be kind of hopefully a lifelong collection of things that you're noticing all the time. Yeah. So whether or not you're doing a plan, the kindness method, the plan itself is just one tiny part of it. It's about generally feeling better about yourself and your life and your relationships and your choices. So what I would say is the maps that are specific to your habit, if the plan you want to have has changed, then you can treat it as a fresh change. But it's important to kind of remember that the maps about your strengths and what hasn't worked before, all of these are live, ongoing maps that are supposed to cultivate more self-awareness. So the beauty of it is that if you do lapse or you do deviate from your plan, you don't have to do all that groundwork again. Definitely. The plan itself, you can tweak based on what you've learned. And so if you have lapsed or relapsed, for example, a lapse being, by the way, a slight deviation, and a relapse being going back to how things were when you started, or worse, whatever that is for you. It's about really reminding yourself of your capacity, of your strengths, etc., to even want to action a new plan, and informing those maps based on what didn't work. You know, relapse is a huge part of learning. Yeah, it's really, really important. So I would say, first of all, cut yourself some slack. It's not easy to make changes. And what I would also do is, if you're not ready to implement the plan again, just have your plan be doing the strengths and achievements maps for like 2 weeks. Just say, every day I'm going to write 5 things I like about myself. Or try and think about the way that I talk to myself, as opposed to going straight in with the plan, because the plan comes in way later in the book anyway. Yeah. So the objective being, like you say, cut yourself some slack, be kind to yourself. I think this particular question was someone who's had some pretty bad news, quite a lot of bad news, and is maybe drinking more than they want to be. But I think even, like you say, even the fact that they're aware that they're not sticking to the plan is awareness, and is showing that they are wanting to make changes. Yeah, do you know, I mean, how many people beat themselves up and think, like, you know, drinking, for example, is a really efficient way of, in the short term, dealing with stress, for example, and just switching off. If you start blaming yourself for it, you think that you're weak. It's really effective. It's a really good drug in that sense. And if it's the one you've always defaulted onto, like, I expect that if and when I suppose, unfortunately, something really difficult happens in my life next, I expect that my first default for comfort is going to be food. Luckily, I've diversified it, and so I would then go on to the second thing and the third thing and the seventh thing that I've got now, because I'm such a geek for it. But that first initial thing is gonna always probably be there, because it's just been shown to me for so many years that it's effective. I'm old enough that pathway has been laid. Yeah. And so don't beat yourself up about it. You're only human, and just go back to it whenever you're ready. But I'd say in the short term, regardless of whether you have a plan in action, a reduction plan, or a management plan, or an abstinence plan when it comes to drinking, do the self-esteem stuff. Do the paperclip challenge, the thing where every time you say something horrible to yourself, you put one paperclip from one pocket into another pocket. Do the stuff that makes you feel better about yourself, so that you don't set yourself up to fail. Because one thing I learned losing weight was that you're better off taking longer to get there and doing it properly. And I used to hate when people would say that to me, but it wasn't until I'd lose it and then gain it all back, and I realized how crap that felt, that I realized they were right. You are better doing the proper groundwork. And once you've done the groundwork, everything goes quickly. Happens really, really quickly. But you can't half-ass that bit, unfortunately, or else you slip back, I think.
That's brilliant advice. Good advice to finish on. You can't half-ass the groundwork.
No, you can't half-ass the groundwork. And if you do the groundwork, everything else is just quick, really, really quick.
And also, it's quicker to get back on track when we're tested, because we will be, won't we?
Yeah, and also, you know, the more you make it difficult for yourself to lapse back into that lifestyle, and sorry, I'll just say one more thing. If you isolate that habit, as opposed to look at it in the context, this habit change as something that improves your whole life, you actually make it more difficult to go back into your old ways.
Right.
For me, for example, it's getting involved with the place that I spin. I know the people there. If I'm not there for a week, they're going to know about it.
Yeah.
You know, there are things that are keeping me in place. There's no chocolate in my house, especially not on Sunday nights, because that's when I get sad. You know, like, these are things that I've kind of taught myself. And I think anyone can do it. And you don't need me or any other expert or a guru, or it really is just reflecting on what you're like and being cool with it.
Yeah, like you say, we're all experts by our own experience, aren't we?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. You just need someone to ask the questions that draw that out, because we don't tend to know what questions to ask ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you.
So much great advice. This is it. This is the book, The Kindness Method. Thanks, Shahroo, for your time.
My pleasure. Bye.
Bye.